Your support helps us bring you programs you love. Go to wyomingpbs.org, click on Support, and become a sustaining member or an annual member. It's easy and secure. Thank you.
Wyomingites commit suicide at one of the highest rates in the country. The Foundation for the Episcopal Diocese of Wyoming has set aside $100,000 for 1 year to help, but has made it clear that the public sector must not withdraw from its responsibility of preventing suicide in Wyoming. We'll visit with Episcopal Bishop John Smiley and also with Rihanna Brand from Grace for Two Brothers. She's a suicide survivor. Next on Wyoming Chronicle.
Funding for Wyoming Chronicle is provided in part by the Dragisevich Foundation, supporting the work of the Wyoming Community Foundation.
It's our privilege now to be joined by the Right Reverend John Smiley of the Episcopal Church. We're talking here in Casper. Reverend Smiley, welcome to Wyoming Chronicle.
Thank you, Craig.
This is a tough subject that we want to talk about today, suicide in Wyoming. And I want to begin with a letter that you composed to Wyoming's elected officials back in the summer of 2017. Tell me about that letter and why did you write that letter? Tell us what it was about.
You bet. Thanks for this. Thanks for the work you do. This is such an important issue and concern, and it affects so many lives. Suicide affects so many lives in our state. I wrote that letter because there was all complete withdrawal of funding for suicide prevention in the state of Wyoming. And to me, it seems that this is the #1 moral priority for our state now. We've often been #1, #2, or #3 in per capita suicides in the nation. And I just could not understand why the legislators would ignore this tremendous problem. I called on the legislators to rethink their decisions, which of course they couldn't do at that point, they would say. But I also called on, I quoted scripture about where your treasure is, there's your heart also. And the treasury of this state apparently has no heart for those who are dying by suicide. And that was a huge concern to me. And I felt that they needed to hear a voice of the diocese, of the Episcopal Diocese of Wyoming, speak to them about this. It also told them that we would offer a stopgap measure of granting $100,000 from our foundation to be able to work with prevention management organization and each of our congregations throughout the state to take the lead for this year to work towards preventing, stopping people choosing to die by suicide.
We'll talk about those efforts here in just a moment,
sure.
Reverend, but what did you hear back?
I only received one letter back from the legislature, and that letter was essentially defensive, defending their position, stating that they thought there were other priorities that they were funding, and this wasn't on at least this one's priority list.
Have you given some thought as to why that might be? I mean, a simple answer might be, the money's just not there right now.
See, I did give some thought. I couldn't find a logical conclusion. My thought leads me to a place of potential selfishness or fear on their part, because the money is there. We're only talking about a tiny portion of the budget. I believe the funding was somewhere between $2 and $3 million, which is a tiny portion. And when one considers also today's economy, with the elevation of most investments, there's even more money, but folks act as if this rainy day fund is still waiting for a rainy day. But folks, the rainy day is here. With each death by suicide, it's more than rainy day. They're tears from heaven falling, and certainly from the eyes of the people who have lost a loved one.
And drug-related issues too.
And that is a real problem. But I don't, well, to me, a leadership word is both. It's not one or the other. Let's find a way to address all of the issues and really dig deep and see if we can find the systemic reasons why these issues continue.
And let's go there. What is your thought about why Wyoming has such a tough problem with suicide?
You know, I'm not an expert, but my sense is, as you already mentioned, drugs and alcohol. I would say the easy access to guns is one of the reasons. I mean, you can buy a handgun at a garage sale in Wyoming. Another piece, and perhaps the one that I think of the most, is the sense of isolation that is part of our state. Not only vast distance, but we have this isolated ethos of the cowboy up mentality that we should all be able to take care of ourselves, cover all of our own problems all by ourselves. And I think that sort of social isolation and the physical challenges of living in an isolated state, if you will, add to the choices for people to take their lives, with the deep loneliness that people may fear, the deep loneliness that I've been thinking a lot about social media recently as well, and thinking that social media doesn't address really the issue of relationship. People need to be in relationship, and particularly when they're in troubled mental or physical states. We need to be in relationship with others to experience the love and encouragement that community can bring to individuals.
Reverend Smiley, I want to remind our viewers, on our screen throughout the program tonight is the number for the National Suicide Helpline, and I want to encourage our viewers, if you or anyone you know or love is contemplating suicide, to call that number right now. Let's turn to the Episcopal Church and your efforts. Across Wyoming, $100,000. What is it that you've been successful or are trying to accomplish?
You know, we set aside $100,000 and we asked each of our congregations, the 49 congregations in the Episcopal Diocese of Wyoming, to submit a grant so that they could put on a program in their communities. And we have had success in that. We have had programs in some of our smaller communities like Dixon and Baggs or Newcastle. We've had programs in our larger communities in Cheyenne. And some of where I mean, for me, it's creative. It's not only working with our parishioners, but it's engaging members of the community to come to our church, or we go to their programs. We've worked with schools. You know, I've heard recently about a school in Laramie County that a grant through our tiny little church in Medicine Bow worked with the school system, and several years ago, there were 4 or 5 suicides in a certain period of time, and since the program was offered, sadly, there's been 1. But that's progress, and we wish there wasn't that 1. But we can see little things like that where it appears to be making a difference. And we've been so pleased to be able to bring a real expert as well. One of our churches partnered with another church to bring in Kevin Hines, who gave a program in Rock Springs. And Kevin is a man who jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge and had preparing to take his life, and on the way down realized, I don't want to die. And he tells his story, and it's inspiring, and it perhaps opens us up and opens those who may be thinking about death, taking their life, that there are other options for them.
You've reached out to doctors and schools.
Yes, we have.
Tell me about that.
Well, with the doctors, you know, very often patients who are depressed and suicidal will go to an emergency room, or they'll go to an urgent care center, and usually the doctors are just, you know, let's get through them, because they're overwhelmed by their 10 or 15 minute blocks of time that they might have with the patient. And we've sought to provide some opportunities for doctors and nurses, healthcare providers, to learn how to read the signs from their patients, and to even ask the question, are you thinking about killing yourself? And we need to be blunt with these questions. You know, so often people think if you ask that question, you're going to push folks over the edge. But in fact, it's the exact opposite that happens. People feel all of a sudden, well, sometimes we'll feel all of a sudden that this person may know me, this person cares about me, this person understands some of what I'm thinking. Not always, but more often than not.
This might be good advice for family members, whether it be grandparents or mothers or fathers or a brother or a sister.
Right, yeah.
You've also been into schools.
We've been into schools, again, offering, you know, I believe there's a mandate for teachers to learn about suicide prevention, but again, this is another irony of our state's government, that it might be a mandate, but then there's no funds to provide for it to happen. So this is one of the ways that we've actually worked this year to assist in teaching educators to come and participate in programs that are sponsored by the Episcopal Diocese of Wyoming and our congregations around the state.
You did hear back from Governor Meade.
I did.
What did he say?
I got a wonderful response from Governor Meade and also a member of his staff that was just very thankful for the letter that I wrote to the legislature and the challenge that was put forward there. He also invited me to be part of a future symposium, which sadly I'm not able to be this coming May because I'll be out of the area. But I was very pleased with his response and happy that the governor also has said this is a priority for him, for the state of Wyoming.
As we conclude our segment here, Reverend Smiley, if you were to speak to the legislators from your heart, and this is airing during this budget session of the Wyoming legislature, what would you tell them if you could have the audience?
You know, I'd ask them to talk to families, moms, dads, brothers, sisters of people who've taken their life by suicide, and see if that might be able to soften their hearts and change their minds so they could reorder their priorities.
It's been a pleasure to visit with you. 2 years ago, we sat in this very room and visited with Rihanna Brand from Grace for Two Brothers, a suicide survivor herself. And now we're going to catch up with her as we continue our discussion on this serious topic in the state of Wyoming, prevention of suicide. Bishop Smiley, thank you so much for sharing about this topic on Wyoming Chronicle.
Craig, thank you for the opportunity. I'm so thankful that you all are addressing this, and let's pray it makes a difference.
We sure will. Congratulations on your efforts, for sure.
Thank you.
And now it's our pleasure to be visiting with Rihanna Brand. Rihanna is with Grace for Two Brothers here in Cheyenne. Rihanna, welcome back to Wyoming Chronicle.
Thanks so much for having me.
You're sure welcome. You are yourself a survivor of a suicide attempt. And so I want to ask you, you first came on our show 2 years ago and told us about that. And we're wondering how are you doing?
I'm doing okay. You know, I've established a really great support group of people around me, as well as my therapist, and some coping skills like yoga, hula hooping, meditation, devotionals, and then outreach and helping other people really helps me cope. So yeah, I'm doing okay.
That's wonderful to hear. You look great.
Thank you.
And so again, we're pleased that you're here. You started to do some very, very important work with Grace for Two Brothers. And before we get into what that is, I want to remind our viewers that on the screen right now is a number for the suicide helpline. It's on your screen. If you or anyone you know or love, maybe it's your grandparents, maybe it's your son or daughter, maybe it's your brother or sister, are thinking about suicide, or you know of someone who is, call this number right now. We encourage you to do that. Rihanna, your group, Grace for Two Brothers, does fascinating work here in Cheyenne for what is really a national problem, but it's more so a Wyoming problem. Tell us what you do relative to suicide prevention and education.
Well, suicide is a very big problem here in Wyoming. We're consistently in the top 5 in the nation for suicide rates per capita. So Grace for Two Brothers Foundation is a nonprofit dedicated to suicide prevention through awareness and education, as well as providing support to survivors of suicide loss. So this is everything from prevention efforts to postvention. Prevention is things like trainings, QPR, mental health first aid and assist, going in and giving presentations in the schools, doing outreach and awareness events like Mental Health March with free coping skills throughout the community, different things like that. Postvention is where we go in and we provide support to survivors of suicide loss around the state.
And I want to talk about that program in just a minute, but when you go around and visit with people in Wyoming, do you believe that most folks really understand how bad of a problem this is? And I should let our viewers know, Wyoming suicide rates are almost twice the national average. As you said, we're always ranked first, second, or third in suicide rates. Do the general folks in Wyoming really understand what a problem this has become?
Yes and no. It depends on where you're at. The coalition in Casper and in Gillette are very strong. Sheridan and Buffalo have, the Wyoming chapter of American Foundation of Suicide Prevention. But that's about it. In the smaller areas, we just did a training in Wheatland and I passed through Chugwater and no one really talks about suicide, and as soon as I open up that conversation, a lot of people are like, thank you. Because it is such a hush-hush taboo subject in Wyoming, for sure.
How do you tell people to do that? What's your advice to folks to talk about this issue?
Just open up. We all have a different struggle and a story of overcoming struggles, and you never know who that's going to inspire. And we need to have these hard conversations of suicide and depression and mental health with each other in order to know that it's okay. So to open up that conversation, I suggest just getting educated, go to a QPR training, get some information on suicide rates, and then start outreaching and helping other people.
As we visited with Bishop Smiley earlier in the show, he said one question that doctors can ask, or that parents can ask, or that brothers and sisters can ask is, are you thinking about suicide? Is it that hard yet that easy to start the conversation?
Well, oftentimes suicide, that word gets stuck in our throat. There's a lot of anxiety that comes with asking the question and what answer you're going to receive. So if someone says yes, you're going to be like, oh, now what?
And so now what?
So that's what the QPR trainings teach you. QPR is question. You learn to ask that correct question, that direct one where, are you having thoughts of suicide? Are you thinking about killing yourself? And when you ask that direct question, you're more than likely going to receive a direct response back. It opens up that communication. And honestly, to be a person on the other end, at the receiving end of that question, it's very, it's almost a relief. Like, wow, that person cares enough to have this conversation with me? Wow. And so it really opens up that conversation. And then the next one is P, persuade. You teach someone, or you get taught how to persuade someone to get help. What are some key things you can say? The 800 number you can use, and the person, the crisis call center, will actually walk you through on how to ask questions and persuade someone to get help. And then R is refer. You need to take the QPR where you are locally, not just online. That's a great program online, but it doesn't have the local resources. So R, where are you going to send someone if they answer yes to that question? That's why this education is so important, because we do need to ask that correct question, that direct, but then we need to know the next steps as well on how to get someone help.
So what about maybe teenagers? A teenager might be seeing this, and they may know of one of their friends. They don't have time for the training. They don't have maybe training available to them. Right now, again, when they've heard our conversation, what should they do this moment?
In that moment, if someone is threatening suicide, there's also the Safe to Tell program. That was launched about 2 years ago, and it's an incredible program. It's an app, it's a website and a phone number that students can download, and they can actually send a tip in anonymously, saying, hey, this person at Say, for instance, Central High School in Cheyenne, Wyoming, in my third period class was talking about suicide or injuring themselves and they need help. And then dispatch takes that and contacts the people at Central High School in order to get that student help without having that fear of the other student who's telling of losing that friendship or getting in trouble. Yeah, absolutely. So it's a safe way to tell. And honestly, it's been an incredible program. They've had about almost 1,000 tips within the last year that have come in, and a majority is suicidal threats.
Sad to think about that, really. Your experience, this is not just a problem for teenagers. It's not just a problem for women. It's not just a problem for men. It's not just a problem for younger folks or older folks.
Yeah, suicide is something that does not discriminate. It doesn't matter, what religion or race or what socioeconomic status you sit at. Suicide is a thought that does go through a lot of humans' minds no matter what's happening. We all go through struggles that bring us to our knees, and it's up to the people around us to help pick us up. But what we see here in Wyoming is that there's a stigma associated with mental health. Like, you're weak, or you need to cowboy up a little more. But in reality, if you tell people to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, that is something physically impossible to do. So we have to change the conversation about suicide because it doesn't discriminate, so we can't discriminate and have this stigma associated with it.
Rihanna, there might be people who have experienced suicide in their lives recently that now themselves are struggling with emotional grieving, with the emotions associated with a friend or a family member. What advice do you have for them today if they're struggling with how to cope?
One, I want them to know that they're not alone. This grief, there's so many emotions that come in. At first, there's the numb and shock, this can't be real, denial of the reality. And then all of a sudden you just get crippled with the reality. And so I want them to know, first and foremost, you're not alone. Second, reach out. Make sure you get connected with a mental health professional. If you guys need to know where that is in your location, please contact the Grace office. We've got, partners throughout the entire state where we can refer you to. And three, take care of yourself. Don't forget to eat. Don't forget to shower. Don't forget to do things for you right now because, there's so much else happening. Don't forget to take care of you.
Rihanna, your group, Grace for Two Brothers, provides an amazing service in my eyes. Once a suicide happens in a family, you're there immediately after the fact. What services do you provide?
So here in Laramie County, it's called the Laramie County Loss Team. We worked with the local coroner's office and law enforcement on this, and we kind of act as a victim's advocate. And we go out and we meet with the family on scene to let them know all of the things I just did and more. The bereavement packets, we worked with the Episcopal...
These are pre-prepared and they're ready to go.
Yep, they will be in every corner throughout the entire state the 1st of May. So we're almost done getting all that stuff to the printers and getting it back. But it'll have a financial guide, information on biohazard cleaning, information on, what are the next steps in arranging the funeral and financial milestones and different things like that, a checklist of documents you need. It's a full guide on how to help families after one of the most devastating losses that they encounter.
When you visit with lawmakers or decision makers in Wyoming, and they tell you, we'd love to do more, but we just can't right now, what goes through your mind?
The sense of urgency is literally life and death. I want them to feel that. We've worked with loss survivors and we work with people living with suicide ideology. It is literally life and death. I don't know, any other more important thing than human life. And so when they say you don't have time right now, we need to have time. We have to make this a #1 priority to have discussions and to put funding back into, and this is very important.
One of the things that I think is lost on many who are in a position to make decisions is it's not just the suicide victim himself or herself. it's so many more people that are directly impacted by this.
Absolutely. They call it the ripple effect. You know, one drop goes in and there's a whole community that is grieving. And you know, with Wyoming, the way that it is, it's one community with one really long road. One suicide can impact the entire state. And you know, for us to not be having these conversations when we sit at the ranking we do, and to not have funding, I mean, none of it makes sense.
Rihanna, there might be some people out there watching who might want to help, and to help not only their community, their family, but the state. What should they do?
March 1st, yesterday, we are going to be we held our first Wyoming State Capitol Day to advocate with the legislators. So please email them, House and Senate representatives, and just let them know that mental health and suicide prevention is important for this budget. And 2, get involved. You know, we have a volunteer basis of about 150 people, and that's never enough. We need to help in other counties. We are expanding our projects, and so we need as many volunteers as possible. And this could be anything from writing a newsletter to helping out with events to posting on social media.
Well, Rihanna, we're out of time, but I can't thank you enough for the courage to visit with us again. The work you do is admirable.
Thank you.
And Wyoming PBS will continue to pay attention to this issue and do what we can to help.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for joining us.